channels on.
Oh, we don't have all the channels
Now.
on. Now we are live. Now you can probably see us. After we've talked all this time. Just saying, now you can probably see us.
And we can do, I guess, a whole sermon now on the importance of one thing. Though it may be small, little on-off switch.
So it's important to be on. That's right. Now it's popping up that we're live with another perspective.
So we'll redo this. This is Jason and Melissa McKinnies with another perspective. And today we have our senior executive worship pastor, Evan Milby. And I've always wanted to do that like the old Johnny Red Kerr from the Chicago Bulls. It's Evan Milby.
I'm actually surrounded by, like these two guys love sports. Does anybody know their favorite baseball team? If you know their favorite baseball team, I think they both share the same one.
I think Evan's got it on.
Oh my goodness.
So,
you actually see, yes. Okay, so that one was an easy one. Here, let's ask this. What's Pastor Jason's favorite football team? Do you have a favorite football team?
I can't say I have a favorite football team. I was rooting for the underdogs.
Goodness gracious. So on that note, who are you pulling for in the game on Sunday? Maybe that might be.
Super Bowl Sunday. And I don't think we can we say that online?
I don't know.
It's the big game weekend.
Yes, yes.
Who are you going to root for?
Who's the underdog?
I'll be honest. I was rooting for the Saints.
Yeah.
And
the officials were not.
Exactly.
So we'll just throw that out there, and if you're an official, we present Jesus and forgiveness. So we just want to help you out.
It's really getting deep in here. Hey, it's a good time for me right now to interject that you can share this video on your Facebook pages. Go to our YouTube channel, Another Perspective. Subscribe to that. You'll always know when we're going online. Also, it's a good time to mention that you can subscribe to the Southern Illinois Worship Center YouTube channel right now, and you'll always know when we're going live. We have live chats going on there on every Sunday at 11 o'clock. I'm one of the online campus pastors, and I say one of because we're adding to our team. So I'm really excited about that. But we love to stay connected with you. So again, it's a great time right now to share this share this video on your Facebook page because we're going to be talking about something very, very, very dear to our heart today. Actually, Jason is going to be interviewing Evan and I about perhaps our favorite topic. It's something that is just very near and dear to us. So
we're going to talk today a little bit about worship. And I think it's really good to have Evan here and Melissa because you both come from very different backgrounds in how you kind of come at worship.
Yeah.
So we'll start with this. We'll just go out with an easy question. When was the first time you led worship in a church setting?
Go.
Oh, man.
Or maybe not lead worship, but you sang and you got involved in church.
Go ahead. You start.
I know the answer, I think, to Melissa. She was 3.
I was 3 when I actually had my first solo in church.
Yeah.
But I didn't lead worship when I was 3.
I don't know that I can hit the exact age. I was young. I was probably somewhere in there. And it's funny because my parents, who are also worship pastors for many years and did that.
So thankful for their service.
Yeah.
And
We got to listen to their album one day going through Dallas.
Oh,
Yeah.
Little old DC Milby.
Yeah.
DC Milby, so that's always a good one.
And a shout out to Doug and Cindy Milby right now.
To
Shout out
DC
to
Talk.
Yeah, we're shouting out to them. Yeah.
But I remember, growing up, especially with them leading worship, I've heard stories about me running up on stage in the middle of, probably wasn't supposed to, I'm sure people were freaking out, but me just being so engaged. And then I remember one time my dad and I doing kind of like a special on a Sunday where even though I was young, it was just me and him, and he had a guitar, and we just kind of went through a couple old worship songs together, and that was kind of like my first experience kind of being on the church platform. Of course, it was with my dad, and it was just cool. I mean, I was still very young and trying to understand it all, but I just remember like just always having a passion for it, always having a passion for music, but I think obviously having my parents as that example that I was constantly seeing, it just kind of rooted that passion within me to want to be a worshiper.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
All right, Melissa.
I was 3 when I had my first solo in church, but I think I knew that I was a worship pastor, and this is going to sound so crazy, but I've grown up in church my whole life, singing, being in choirs and going to Bible college and different things like that, and it was such a, I've had some great opportunities, and some opportunities that I missed because I was, young and immature. But I think the moment that the light bulb went off for me was when I found, folks, I'm dating myself, a Hillsong VHS tape.
If you don't know what that is, you're in Evan's world.
Totally dating myself. But it was of Darlene Check at Hillsong. And it was like the Shout to the Lord VHS. And maybe you have that. If you've got that, man, that's a priceless treasure. I don't even know where mine went. But when I watched her leading worship in that church, I thought, that's who I am. That's what I want to be. I want to lead people in worship like her. And I thought, it was so foreign. It looked totally different from than what our structure was at our church at the time. And
it introduced you to a whole new way of leading.
Yes, it did. And I incorporated how she led in our church where we were going at the time, which was my mom and dad's church at the time. And I incorporated that, and it just revolutionized my life. Like the way she led out, and I was like, if that's what a worship leader is, I'm all about that, and I just loved how she, number one, I still love how she leads, but it totally changed, everything for me in that regard. So, yeah.
So you got your start, looking at her, and then, you watched your mom and dad do that.
Yeah.
What are some really big influences in your life today? And, how do you stay sharp in leading worship and not getting stuck necessarily in a rut? Let's put it that way.
That's good. That's a good one. I constantly throughout the week am always, I think you do this too. I constantly kind of pull up like the Bethel channel on YouTube and different things. I'm constantly always looking up, Spotify on different churches and stuff that I follow, and just constantly try to keep a pulse on what's happening. Whether it's in our area or around the United States, across the world, and just try to keep a pulse on what God's doing in different areas, and kind of see how that relates to us in our area. See what connections are happening there, and just try to keep a pulse on that, and just try to constantly through the week have my own worship moments, devotional times,
right?
Where I try to just focus on that and say, God, what do you want for our next step? Where do you want to take us next, God? What do you want to download into me that we may be able to share with our congregation or with our people, and things like that. So that's constantly what I'm doing.
Amen. I think for me, there's a scripture in the Bible. David encouraged himself, and I know I'm a lot like these guys. I turn on worship music. Man, I go for broke. It's my own personal moment. I've often said this: you will never take a congregation higher than where you are.
Right.
And my goal is to find myself in His presence, saturate myself in His presence. Just worship Him without abandon. Just lifting. I should say with abandon. Just let it all go. And I try to stay current. I'm just like Pastor Evan. I'm on Spotify, different resources, just trying to find out who's got a new song. I follow a lot of worship leaders on social media.
Yeah.
There's a new song out right now that's just like My Heart's Cry. I'll put that song on, and it just takes me to a place where I feel like Jesus is calling me to be. And definitely reading His Word. And talking about songwriting and things like that. The best way to do all that is to know His Word and write His Word. And so reading His Word, I read several different translations of that. Worship devotions. I get those on my phone. You can get those on YouVersion. I have several in my office. And so, finding my own personal prayer closet. I think that's probably...
Yeah, I think YouVersion's great because you can actually go on, besides just being a great Bible source, but there's so many different devotional series
yes.
that you can get into from so many people. And especially, I mean, they've got devotionals from different worship leaders, whether it be
Yes.
Matt Redman or Chris Tomlin or different things. I know Jesus Culture has one out where they kind of actually go through and talk through some of their worship songs and put devotions with those songs. And so it's a great tool for that.
Love that.
So the next question is not probably for the whole general audience, but we're all in ministry. And so this is probably more of a question that the answers leads to people who are in ministry and leading worship. Pastor Evan and I travel a lot together. We go to conferences. Of course, Melissa and I are married. If you don't know that, her and I are married. We have an interesting story one day we'll tell about all of that. But and I'm comfortable in asking this question because I know the answers because we talk all the time. But in relation to a worship pastor, to the senior pastor or the lead pastor or the teaching pastor, we hear a lot about that dynamic of that relationship. I'd like for both of you to speak to that from your levels and your experiences, and then kind of what we hear out on the street a little bit, and ways to help with that, if you will.
Yeah.
And so let me say what you hear a lot when you go to conferences. When you go to church conferences, it's usually the worship pastor is rubbing up against the senior leadership. Like the senior leader has a plan for the service, but the worship pastor isn't quite on board, doesn't have the same vision, doesn't have the same heart. The worship pastors come up with 4 great songs for this Sunday. Nothing goes with this sermon series. Nothing flows. And the senior pastor's on the front row going, oh my goodness, what in the world? I thought we talked about this in a meeting. And so,
you're really good at that because you will hear it from both sides. You were the worship pastor, married to a senior pastor, and then we see it at conferences. You sit in senior pastor meetings, you sit in worship pastor meetings. So you've heard both. Where Evan probably has only heard it from the one side.
You should be well-rounded.
I should be very.
She's chipped off on both sides.
I have. I've come home and been like, he'll say to me like, hey, I wanted you to do this song, and I'm like, but you didn't say that. Well, I thought I did, so, and there's so much of that.
I've done that. I've never done that.
Oh, I'm just gonna,
Let's keep moving.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna keep moving on that. But I remember one time we got back from a conference and Pastor Evan had went to the worship pastors, like, little meetings or sessions or whatever you want to call them. And I went somewhere else and I didn't go. I went with the senior leaders, I think, that conference.
Yeah, you were with me, and then we debriefed on the flight home.
He comes out and he's like, and every time I go into those sessions, I think, man, we just don't have these issues. So what kind of issues do you hear about in those worship ones that we don't hear about, that we don't have here?
It's kind of that in general, though. It's it's funny whenever you go into some of those sessions with with a bunch of worship leaders. It's like as soon as that topic comes up about friction between maybe the worship pastor and the pastor, or the other one, which is you hear about common, is the worship pastor with the sound engineer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you said that because I was going to lead that, but go ahead, absolutely.
But and it's funny because people you start seeing people's faces kind of light up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we got to talk about that." What does everybody do? Because
it's like slow pitch softball to a major leaguer right there.
And I find because obviously the worship pastor is putting together what he feels like is a good plan for what he thinks God wants to do, and the pastor's putting together a plan of what he feels like God's wanting to do. But sometimes I feel like the pastor and the worship leader don't always communicate with each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it can be easy to get stuck on our own agendas instead of looking at the big picture of, okay, what does God want to do through every section of the service instead of just the part that I'm leading.
Yeah.
So good.
So, I know for us, we really haven't had those issues.
No.
Because I think, at least for us, we work well and always leaning into each other on what can we do to hit the goal for the big picture.
Well, and I think, I think in our situation, and somebody must be thinking about me or coming because my noses went to itching right now, but
I'm thinking about you.
I think the best thing that could have happened in our situation was I was the worship pastor prior to Pastor Evan coming on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was this, I was a senior worship pastor, and then he came on as a worship pastor, and he has since moved up into, he's our executive worship pastor, and I've moved on into I have a different title. But I think the best thing that could have happened is I was the worship pastor already. So in our worship department, there was already an established great relationship between worship and senior leadership. Yeah. So when Pastor Evan came in, it was already established it was that way. There was already communication. Yeah. He saw me communicate with senior leadership. What does senior leadership want? So his heart was already like that anyway. His heart's so teachable. That's what I love about Pastor Evan. But he already saw that communication going on, and it was such a great relationship anyway that there wasn't room for there to be an issue. And there's a lot of communication that happens between these three right here. A lot of communication, a lot of talking through series, talking through songs. And there's a lot of trust between the three of us. There's a lot of trust, and there's a relationship. I think that's key to any worship pastor situation. And Pastor Evan's heart, I can't stress that enough, is like exactly what he just said. Not being concerned with just the part that you're over, but looking at the big picture. And a lot of that is he's a 9. He's a peacemaker on the Enneagram. But anyway, but I love that he is able to
We have put the number 9 to the test today.
Yes. We freaked him out. But it's also what makes him so such a vital part of our team is his ability to want to see the big picture. That's a 9's strength, is they want to see the whole perspective. They want to see the whole picture. And when he comes in, he came in with that heart. He came in with that desire, and he came in desiring to see the vision that God had given my husband and myself for this region, for this church. He wanted to see it fulfilled. Yeah. And he didn't come in with his own agenda, exactly all of his words I'm just reusing right now. And so I think that has been what's great. And I had a great relationship with the sound guy or the sound engineer that was on staff.
Both of our lead sound engineers
exactly.
were,
amazing
prior
people.
to our one now, even before, and Jason Claunch now works for as an engineer. So, but he still attends here and involved here. My almost 10 years of pastoring, I don't think we've ever had an issue between the stage and the sound booth ever that I can think of. And
a lot of that goes back to what I just said here with our relationship: trust, and here's the other word: respect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Respect what they do. Respect what they bring to the table. Yeah. And vice versa. It goes both ways. And I think it definitely helps when your team has great communication, great respect for everybody's roles and everybody's jobs. Yeah. Every job is important. Just as every part of the service is important, every job is important.
Well, I know for our team, it's what you said. Respect is huge, but it's also in the respect to not always, especially if somebody comes to you, whether it's the worship leader or your sound guy, if you're connected with one another and one says, hey, I want to let you know, this just isn't working right, maybe this way. Is there something else we can try? That we don't get quick to be defensive.
Right.
It's called having trust in each other to say, hey, if you come to me and say that, hey, we've got a problem with this, or this isn't working right, or maybe this doesn't sound right, that we don't take offense to that. Because, we trust in each other that we're here to help the team.
Right.
Amen.
And we're here to help one another do our job better. And so when you have each other's backs, and don't just jump to, being defensive when maybe there's something, that needs to be talked about.
Amen.
Or a change that needs to happen. It's being on board with one another. And that's what's most important.
There's a lot of technicalities that go into any church service. I don't care if you're doing services on the scale to which we do them, or if you're doing, less than the scale in which we do them. Mm-hmm. Every church service has a ton of technicalities in that, and a lot of personalities. And one of the things we have here is we never embarrass each other publicly or call each other out on anything publicly. Do we have discussions? Absolutely, but they're usually in the privacy of an office where there isn't in a microphone calling somebody out over something. It's like, hey, maybe I need a little less of the drums, or, like the other night I was preaching, and we do, multiple services. And so I just went to the sound guys, and I'm like, I need a little bit more of me. And they're like, well, why didn't you say something while you were preaching? I'm like, I don't do that. I'm not going to call you out and call attention to you. You were already trying to, I think we were using a new microphone, and I'm like, I already knew you were struggling, and I was not going to say something to call attention where everybody in the room now is going to turn and look at the sound guy. I honor you enough that I'll get through it, and then we'll work on it when nobody's in the building, and we'll sit down with it. And likewise, when you first came on board, Evan, it was a big change for me, moving from my wife leading worship, and we flowed together for years, and then you. And one of the first conversations Evan and I ever had is, we are going to work at being friends. We're going to be together outside of here, and we're going to know each other, because I live with her, so it just kind of second nature to know her. I had to have that with him, and so we travel together, we play golf together, we do lunch together. All of those things together. That way there's a relationship, and then we'll talk, even out on the golf course, we'll talk about series that are coming up, and this is kind of what I was thinking. And I don't really put myself into the service schedule at all. He decides that, and I trust his walk with the Lord. Amen. And and if I haven't communicated something ahead of time, then that's on me as the senior leader. Like, we have meetings every week, and if I want to go in a different direction, then I'm communicating that in a meeting and not expecting you to figure me out on the fly, except for the closing of my sermons every week. But,
I'm just going to smile real big on that one.
So, it works.
Well, and I can totally throw Pastor Evan too, because I'll be like, especially if I'm one, I'll be like, I know we didn't do this song today, but this is what I really felt at the end of service. And I'll say this, Pastor Evan works really, really hard to accommodate my, we're going to do this. He works so hard.
The number 9 accommodates the number 7.
Yeah, but he does work really hard he does work hard at that, and he's great with our musicians. I'll see him over there. I'll be leading the new song that we just threw at them, and he's over making sure that they know what chords to be going to, and different things like that. And so I really do think that the respect and the trust that we have across the board. I was going to say this, our sound engineer right now is it's Pastor PJ. He's our sound engineer. Mm-hmm. And when he says something to me about monitors or ears or mic or something, or pack or something like that, I have to respect what he says, because that's his world. Yeah. Now, I know what I need, but at the same time, maybe what I need, there's something better for me, or I can change something up on my end to make it better for me. And he often has great insight in that. And again, it goes back to exactly what you said. Have respect. And when we have those meetings in the office to discuss maybe things that we want to change, or we didn't like, or maybe we need to do different or do better, there's ultimate respect in the room. Mm-hmm. Those conversations are so guarded with prayer.
Well, guarded with prayer. A lot like this conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right here.
It's guarded with prayer, and we do things in love. I think that is exactly what you were trying to say. Say things in love.
Yeah, because not every conversation is a easy, fun conversation. There's every church, every position person is going to have moments where things don't go the way you planned, or things don't work out.
You just had this last week. You had.
Oh
this, it's rare, especially on a Sunday, because of how much practice. But our weather's been crazy, and our schedule's been crazy, and we got into the 9:00 service and.
Oh, yeah, last Sunday we got a 9:00 service, and we go to start worship time, and went and hit start the tracks, and we had click, but hardly any tracks were coming out. We didn't know what was going on. So,
and for the record, I'm okay without track.
And for the record, I'm the one that created the issue with a sermon prop that was put behind somewhere and pulled a cord out, and Evan didn't hit me. He didn't scream at me. He just said, hey, can you be careful with the cross? Can you just be careful with the cross?
And there's a whole other message in that. Be careful with the cross.
The Lord took care of that. I didn't have to use the cross the rest of the day.
That's what I say at the 9:00 service. We had Pastor Jason, actually, Jason preached. And so it was awesome. 11 and 1 o'clock, he didn't get to speak. And so
it was awesome. I didn't get to speak.
Tonight on Southern Illinois Worship Center, if you're watching, because I want to put out a clip from that 9:00 service. So, yeah.
So let me go in a different direction. As a worship leader, like as a pastor, you anticipate kind of what the crowd's going to do, or in your mind what you want, if kind of in an image of where you want to go. What is that for you guys as worship leaders, and what is kind of your desire from, and I'm going to use the word crowd, but from the worshipers when you're leading? What does that look like for you? And I think it may be different between the two of you, but you guys will use words like press in or
which is so not your favorite two words.
But what does that mean to you?
But I love it.
You're using your voice to coach them as worshipers. What is that for you?
I can say for me, one thing that I love to see happen, because when people walk into that space, they're not always like in this prepared, ready state to worship, or everybody's doing life, and then walking into this space that we go. Sometimes we go through the motions of life and living through the week, work, family, whatever it is, and so you have all those chaoses that are going on in your life, and then you walk into this space because it's maybe routine. And so I love to, if I can in some way help people in that moment, kind of separate themselves from maybe the daily grind, and just have a moment where it's like, okay, you know what? I totally just need to put everything else aside. I need to focus in on what God is doing in my life, or how maybe I need God to come into my life and make a change in my life, and hopefully allow and help people to maybe just have a moment of release.
Yeah.
And see people just be able to lay things down, and you'll see that. When you're in a time of worship and we're worshiping, because we're on the platform point of view, and so we're seeing the different faces in the crowd, and so if I can be in a moment where I can help maybe some of these people just kind of get out of the normal steps of life and just release whatever they're going through and just focus on God. That's what it's about to me.
That's really good.
So
that's really good.
Yeah. Melissa?
Mine is, of course, that's great. That's exactly what needs to happen. We need to cast our cares on Him. I think for me, when I come into that moment, just ready to just worship the Lord. I mean, just ready to lead. I often think of Miriam in the Bible. And she led. She was a worship leader, and she led out.
She was a tambourine player, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Evan's favorite musician.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I think of that, how she led out. And as a worship leader, I'm to lead.
Yeah.
I am to lead. I am to lead you to a place with God that maybe because of life, because of the things that are going on, maybe you don't feel like you can get there. Maybe you're just like, I'm so burdened by what's happening. And so it's my job to lead and press through all those feelings, all those worries, all those doubts, and lead you to a place where you can freely and, just worship Him with words, with song, hearts upraised, hands upraised. And so for me, I like to see a crowd respond. I love it when one of my favorite songs to lead is A Place of Worship. And so, because it comes to that course of, I'm going to lift my hands. And I love it when I look out and I see everybody, hands just uplifted as far as they can reach, to heaven, as far as they can reach. They've got their hands uplifted. So I think for me, I love it when I see a breakthrough happen. I love it. Our services this past Sunday at our church were so different. 9 o'clock, 11 and 1. And I led out Ministry Moment on this past Sunday. It was my job to lead out on the worship moment, the Ministry Moment. And oh my goodness, at the 9 o'clock, it looked totally different than the 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock looked totally different than the 1 o'clock.
Yeah, let me interject there, because somebody leaned over to me and they said, "Boy, I just love it when it's unscripted." And I just said back to them, this is a scripted, unscripted moment.
Yeah, it was very scripted.
We a couple weeks beforehand, as a staff, were in a room, and I just said, I really feel like I want to bust through some of our routine, and we all get into routines. And I said, I really feel like we want to do it this way. So we scripted the moment that we were, this is what we're going to do. After that, all we were doing was we were giving room for God to do what He wanted to do. And I hate that term, because God can interrupt whenever He wants. Amen. Most often God doesn't do, because we've crowded the space.
Right.
And what we were trying to do is back ourselves out of the space, and in our worship allow God to invade that. And so that's why we say it was a scripted, unscripted moment. We didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah. We just knew that we were going to create that moment of time, whatever God wanted to do from, and throughout the day, it was completely different throughout the whole day. But there were so many miracles and things that happened in that time frame.
Amen.
That was there. And so I appreciate that from my level. I was standing on the front row just basking in this moment that was happening across the building and across the campus throughout the whole day. It was scripted. We did plan for that, but yet you can't ever plan for God.
If only you could have been a fly on the wall practice on Sunday morning. It was a very scripted moment. But Pastor Evan, and so again, this is just where, everybody works together. Pastor Evan was trying to figure out the best way to go into that moment musically. What was the best way musically? What was the best use of what song were we going to go into? What part of the song were we going to go into? And
he's working within the culture of our church, which is we have a spirit of excellence. So how do I transition into that excellence? But also honoring what we were trying to do, because one of our core cultures is we honor one another, but we're excellent. So trying to fit that in, and it is tough to adhere to a certain level of things and be honorable to every person that's involved in it. It's not easy being on staff here at SIWC because of our culture and the way we do things. And Evan is always excellent and he's always honorable. But sometimes when we get in those moments, you got to, all right, how do we get to that? How do we move into that realm? And that's sometimes where where the friction may happen every now and then, is when we're trying to match up our culture with where we want to go.
Right. And I would just say, like, Sunday was a prime example at our church where spirit of excellence, but leaving room for God and flowing. I think that I think for me, when I step into the leadership role as a worship leader, is like knowing that not everyone in the room is at a point of breakthrough. Not everyone is at the point where they can release. Not everyone is at the point where they feel like worshiping. You don't know the news that they got on the way to church that day. I mean, you just don't know. And so my job as a worship leader is to lead out and to make room for those God moments, for those ministry moments, number one. Number two is to get the person in the room that is at a point of breakthrough, that has had a breakthrough or whatever, that they lead out with so much freedom, because I'm leading out with so much freedom, that the person beside them who's maybe not at a breakthrough moment goes, oh my goodness, I'm feeding off of her freedom, their freedom, freedom's coming to me. And so that is truly,
that's part of what I loved about even Pastor Michael last night as he was speaking. He was preaching last night for our Wednesday night service, and he talked about a moment where he said he was picking on Pastor Carey, but he said that he loves standing beside Pastor Carey in worship, because weekly, and I see it too, Pastor Carey is just a worshiper. And so when he goes in that moment, he's got his hands lifted high and he's singing. And so if your person, Pastor Michael, as the example, was talking about how, as soon as he stands next to him, it's like it just gives him this, this, I've got to dive in and start worshiping.
It changes the atmosphere for Pastor Michael because of Pastor Carey's worship.
Yeah.
And I would say that, one of the reasons why we do worship before the preaching is that's what worship does. Worship sets the stage. It's the plow for the seed. It's plowing up the ground, the fallow ground. Worship has a way to get into our hearts, and it takes all the hard places and is turning it over. And then the preaching comes, and the word then is finding much better ground to land its seed on. And so I get to preach after these two all the time. I mean, I jokingly say this at times, but it's a really serious moment. They're my personal karaoke machines. They're my worship pastors. And I always tell Evan that you're my worship pastor. You are shepherding my own worship, because I'm on the front row, and as Evan is leading, or if it's Melissa leading, they're setting an atmosphere for me. They build my faith, and then I get up to preach. Man, they've set this great stage, and it used to be intimidating to follow these two perfect people. But you realize, man, we're on the same team, and they're plowing ahead. Yes. And then it makes my life a whole lot easier as the preacher to do things.
Well, and when my world changed a few months ago, actually it's almost 2 years ago, when my world changed and I wasn't leading worship, Pastor Evan became my worship pastor. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was on the front row cheering him on, like, oh my goodness, when Pastor Cassie leads or anybody leads on our stage, I'm like, I try to be, if I can, and it just depends on my schedule, but I try to be on the front row, like, like, oh my goodness, lead out, because they are my worship pastor. In that moment, they're mine. And I will say this goes back to leadership, that when I lead worship or with Pastor Evan or whatever, I always say that we are like David was to King Saul. Mm-hmm. When he would come in, King Saul would ask for David to come in, bring the harp and play, because all the spirits, everything bad that he was feeling, everything he was dealing with, the circumstances of his life, the worries, all the torments, we all have those in our life. That's what worship does. Worship drives out the enemy. It drowns out the enemy. And so that's what I look at when we get up to lead on Sundays or Wednesday nights or Tuesday mornings, whenever we're leading. It's like we are setting the stage and we are driving out the enemy, allowing for the word to take root and have a safe place to reside and to dwell.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to say something back to that to give you an answer, time to articulate an answer. The three of us are really the architects of the services. There are other people involved, but for the most part, the three people sitting at this table, we design a church service. What are the thoughts that you have in setting up a church service from Sunday to Sunday? Our Wednesday nights are a little different, and you can speak to that. But where are we trying to take the people in your minds? Mm-hmm. And so while you're answering that, one of the things we talk about here, going back to the original question, which is what we expect out of the people, we always tell our teams, the people will always be one level underneath you. Mm-hmm. And so if you want excited worship, then the stage has to be excitable. Yeah. Amen. And if you want the people to come up to this level, then you can't be down here. They're going to be here. And we always use the Lou Holtz statement, I'm a Notre Dame guy. Sorry about you, Michael, Pastor Michael, being Georgia. But he had a quote as a coach. He said, we're going to strive for excellence. And if we strive for excellence, we'll reach great. If we strive for great, we will reach good. If we strive to be good, we would reach average. If we strive to be average, we'll reach poor. You're always going to be one level underneath where you go for. So we always try to be excellent, but also on the stage, we want the people on the stage leading the people to a level higher than where they are currently at. So that means we have to be 2 notches higher to get them up. And so, that's one of the things I love. Evan plays with a guitar, but one of the most dynamic moments is when Evan will get away from the guitar and he just leads. And then there are times, even with the guitar in his hands, he's done very well with this, is even with that guitar, there is a level of excitement on the stage that allows the people to have that moment of breakthrough or release because they're not abnormal because the stage is already doing it. Does that make sense? And I love that about our worship teams. I love that about all the people across our front line, our drummers, give it everything they've got. I look up and I see keyboard players, when they're not playing their part, their hands are uplifted, they're worshiping the Lord. Bass players, they're singing a lot. They are worshiping, and which allows the people to be free. And I'll answer this question too. Many people say, well, what about lighting? What about all that? We used to dim the lights so we didn't have to see the crowd. Because, we did it more for the stage to be free from what people were doing until they got to their moment of breakthrough. Now, our church, we don't ask them to, they're on their feet, they're ready to go.
So good.
And we had worship before we had lighting. Lighting doesn't create worship. It doesn't go. We had worship in this building before we ever had any cool lights or LED screens or anything. All that accent stuff doesn't create anything from there. You either have a heart for worship or you don't. Right.
That's the truth. That is the truth.
So what is in your mind when you're designing a church service? And you do a lot too, Evan. You plan our You Shine services, and you're already on Good Friday and Easter. And kind of what goes into that for you?
I know for me, the first question I ask is, what can we do to create the most impact? Mm-hmm. When I'm in the middle of creating a set list, I kind of go, I don't just pick, these are my 3 favorite songs. I actually take
There's a fast, medium, slow.
And here's a fast, medium, slow. It's about taking the time and really sculpting out, and part of that comes, if I go maybe from a less spiritual side for a moment.
Sure.
But coming from being in the the touring world and doing that type of stuff, is you're constantly trying to create an impactful moment. Yeah. And it may be through certain songs and how they transition into one another, and creating this flowing moment that continues to flow through that segment. And so thinking about things that way. But then when I then put in the spiritual side of it, I'm starting to look at content of, what are we saying here through each song? How's this work into one another? And how's this flow through each moment? What do we want to try to say as we work through the next 5 minutes, and then working into the next 6-7 minutes through the next song? How are we working each moment to then get us to that impact moment where we have maybe our oversight pastor come up and give a word, or it's you coming to give the word? How are we setting that up? And so that's how I look at it. It's many things together besides just picking my favorite songs. It's how these flow.
And probably most of us don't even play our favorite songs.
Sometimes I may have a favorite song, but it doesn't mean that it fits.
Melissa has a favorite key and favorite songs.
Oh yeah.
I do.
I do. On Melissa now.
That's okay. It's all right. Something happens, magical happens, amazing happens when we get in the key of D. I don't know what it is. It's just the key of D. In fact, it's so funny that all the piano players and guitar players know, oh, I hope we're not going to key of D today, because if we're going to key of D today, we'll be all over the place.
The service schedule just went out the window.
I think for me, when I play this service worship set list, and it's been a long time since I've done this, I had a philosophy: praise plus worship equals the glory of God. And so I try to start off with a song that will usher in praise, that we can praise the Lord. And what that means is you're telling him how great he is, how awesome he is. You're praising him. When you think about someone praising you, or when you're praising your children, when they do something well, the words that you use, like, man, that was a great job. Man, that was really helpful. Man, that was really good. And so I try to start off with a song that I know is going to praise God. That may be fast. It may be medium. It may be slow, but we're praising him for who he is and what he has done. And then I try to go into a song that maybe leads us into more of a worship. We're not just praising him, but now we're worshiping him. And we are, all the accolades, God, that we could say goes unto you. And, oh my goodness, your character, God, is so good. And so try to transition into that worship. And sometimes that looks like a medium song. So sometimes it looks like a slow song. And then I go into more of a slower song. But, and again, some Sundays I start off slow and then you end fast. Maybe you start, because you don't want to get into a rut. I think that's the thing with worship, and Pastor Evan can tell you, man, that's an easy thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an easy thing to do. You're just stuck to your methodology. And let me just say this. I'm going to be bold.
Just be Melissa.
I'm going to be bold right now. Please don't get stuck in a rut that you only listen to one genre of music.
Amen.
Don't. Yeah. There's sometimes a Southern gospel song really takes me there, but that's not my genre of choice. A gospel song. I love gospel music. That's my genre of choice. But I can't get stuck just listening to that. Don't get stuck just listening to Bethel or Elevation or contemporary. Be well-rounded with that, because that'll keep you from getting stuck in a rut. And the same thing goes for planning a service, is really making sure that you don't just have one genre on your schedule. Really look at what your series is for your senior worship or senior pastor. Really look at what's on the schedule. That helps choose a song and choose a set list faster than anything. If you know that this is more of a declaration series, like this series is going to teach us how to declare over our lives, declare the promises of God, our set list is probably going to be more declaration, more authoritative. But really look at what's going on, and that helps me set a set list.
Yeah. It's just figuring out how to create those smooth transitions of through the physical content, the spiritual content, every aspect of it. When I think about even our set list this Sunday, we're starting out with zeal, and we're declaring, giving God all the praise for who He is and how we can't get enough of who God is, and giving Him praise for that.
That's a great praise song to start off with, just saying.
And it's also a great high energy moment.
So I'm expecting everyone to be like clapping, jumping, hands up, raised.
Yeah. But then we go into our second song. It's a song off the latest Elevation album called Here Again.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a great song.
Really almost become an anthem here.
Yeah.
Love that song.
And that song is all about how we've come from this moment where, we're thanking God for who He is and inviting Him here. We're then taking a moment to kind of slow down for a second.
Yeah.
And then say, God, you're all I want. You're everything that we need. Would you just meet us here? And just taking that moment to just say, God, just invade our space, come into this room, and do something.
And then when you hit that bridge.
Oh,
not
yeah.
for a moment.
Not for a minute was I forsaken.
Yeah.
The Lord is in this place.
And then from declaring that into, I think then we're going into reckless love. And so...
That's like the best set list ever.
We're about to have church up here.
I know. I'm like, Lord is in this. Like, I just start singing that song right now.
So after declaring, that He's in this place, then we're going to talk about, God's love and how it's going to fight through it, whatever you're dealing with, whatever your situation is. And just having a moment, now that we've invited Him here, then let's talk to God.
Yeah.
Let's talk to Him face to face because He's in this space.
Yes.
We've invited Him into the room. And so now
we're not going to waste this moment.
We're not
going to waste this opportunity,
Absolutely.
God, to have no other time constraints, to have nothing else on our agenda than right here, right now.
Yeah.
You talk to us and we talk to you. And I don't know what it is about today, but like if you see me like this way, I am itching. Like face is itching, ears itching, nose. I know, but
I think
that's what happens. The enemy distracts us with those things. Okay.
Melissa has OCD and ADD. It's perfect,
has to be perfect for a
just
little
for a minute. I think what you both were saying, and we've always talked about this, preaching is not the climactic moment of the service here. The moment that is the climactic and what we are building for and what we are desiring is for every person to have that encounter with God.
Amen.
That whether that is during the worship songs or during our moments of ministry, during the preaching, or how we end our services here is with one last worship song. Whatever that may be, we desire for, and we design, or we're thinking about and praying about, is for those moments for people to encounter God. That's the most climactic moment of any service, is when people walk into the presence of God, and in the presence of God is where the miraculous begins to happen in their lives.
Amen.
And our job is to get ourselves out of the way, and we're leading people to God, but at some point we just kind of slide out of the way, and they now are in the presence of God, and that is our job and our duty. Amen. So I want to thank Pastor Evan for being here, and hopefully you enjoyed him. I certainly do. He's by far one of the best worship pastors I've ever witnessed in my life. Most humble guy in the world. He's a Dove Award winner, tremendous vocalist, and can play just a guitar, make it sing, and a keyboard and drums and all those things. And of course, it's well documented how I feel about Melissa. And but from a worship level, I mean, you both are tremendously gifted and talented. And I think the word that means the most to me about the two of you is that you're anointed to do what God's called you to do. And that separates. There's a difference between being gifted and being anointed.
Amen.
And I appreciate the fact that you're both, and you're humble about it. So hopefully you enjoyed the day and you learned something about worship and looked at it from a different perspective than just what you hear, but actually get to hear the people who normally sing actually talk about worship. And hit us up in the comments, and we'll do our best to get back to each and every one of them. And we hope you have a wonderful day. And if you're in Southern Illinois, we look forward to seeing you at our services on Sunday with Pastor Evan leading. Or you can join us live on all of our Facebook channels, my channel, Melissa's channel, the church channel, or you can subscribe to the podcast, Another Perspective. We also stream live on that YouTube channel. Or you can go to the Southern Illinois Worship Center YouTube channel, and that is youtube.com/Southern Illinois Worship Center.
All one word.
All one word, all lowercase. Or, just all kinds of ways to get in touch
And
with
I'll
us.
meet you there at 11 o'clock. I'm excited for that.
All right. So until the next time, we hope you've enjoyed Another Perspective.